Rain hammered the shattered rooftops of the small French village, turning the ground into a pit of brown chaos. Mud clung to boots, cables, and the wheels of army trucks. The smell of oil, gunpowder, and wet earth filled the air. Lieutenant Jack Turner wiped his hands on his soaked uniform and looked across the ruined riverbank. Where a bridge once stood, only twisted metal remained. "Sir," Sergeant Red Callahan shouted over the rain, "Command says we've got 2 hours. Tanks are waiting back on the road." Turner nodded, jaw tight. 2 hours, he muttered. "Then we make a miracle." The men of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion got to work. Sparks flashed as welding torches hissed in the storm. Soldiers hauled beams through the muck, their movements slow but determined. Turner moved among them, checking bolts, shouting orders, doing whatever it took to keep them moving. Every second counted. Somewhere behind the ridge, artillery thundered, a dull heartbeat of war reminding them that failure wasn't an option. Private Miller, barely 20, stumbled beside him. "Lieutenant, what if the bridge doesn't hold?" Turner crouched, gripping a muddy beam. "Then we rebuild it again. That's what we do, son." He thought of his father back in Ohio, a bridge builder who never saw combat, but built highways that carried men to work every morning. "If you can build, you can save lives," his father had said. Those words had carried Turner through every night of training, every mile of foreign mud. A sudden explosion lit the horizon, and the men froze. Dirt rained down on them. Turner shouted, "Keep working, that wasn't meant for us." His voice cracked, but it steadied the crew. Minutes bled into hours, beams locked into place. Chains groaned under the strain. The rain didn't stop, and neither did they. Finally, as dawn broke faintly through the clouds, the skeleton of the bridge stood across the river, unfinished, but alive. Red looked over and grinned. "Hell of a start, sir." Turner allowed himself a small smile. "Let's finish it before breakfast." He glanced down the road where armored silhouettes waited in the mist. "This is what we came here for," he whispered. "And if you believe in the power of American hands, in the courage that builds even when the world falls apart, stick around. This story is only beginning." In the spring of 1943, before the mud and the chaos of France, Lieutenant Jack Turner had been just another engineer with a pencil behind his ear and dreams bigger than the bridges he built. He remembered stepping off the transport ship in England, the grey sky hanging low like a lid, the air thick with smoke and salt. Around him, hundreds of young Americans unpacked gear, cracked jokes, and pretended they weren't afraid. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers didn't wear glory on their sleeves. Their weapons were slide rules, steel and sweat. They didn't storm beaches. They built the roads so others could. Turner had joined because he believed that engineering could win wars as much as bullets could. Training was grueling. Long nights calculating load limits under dim lanterns, days knee-deep in mud, assembling pontoon bridges across icy rivers. Every mistake was a potential death sentence once the real war began. "Hey, Lieutenant," called Sergeant Red Callahan one morning, his accent thick as Texas dust. "You ever think about quitting this mess and going back to building barns?" Turner smirked. "You ever think about listening to orders, Red?" The men laughed. Even in exhaustion, humor kept them alive. Among them was Private Miller, barely 20, too eager, always asking questions. "Sir," he said once, "why bridges? Why not artillery or infantry?" Turner looked at him and replied quietly, "Because if we stop, they stop. Every tank, every truck, every soldier, they all depend on us. We're the backbone of this whole damn war." The phrase stuck. The backbone became their motto, scrawled in chalk on helmets and truck doors. As weeks passed, Turner's unit grew close. Brothers forged by rain, sweat, and stubbornness. They learned to build fast, to repair faster, and to trust one another completely. The engineers weren't chasing medals, they were chasing reliability. At night, Turner sometimes lay awake listening to bombers droning overhead, thinking of the bridges back home. Solid, peaceful, untouched by war. He wondered if he'd ever see one again. Then came the orders that would change everything, testing a new kind of bridge, one that could fold into a truck bed and deploy in minutes. Portable, strong, revolutionary. Turner folded the paper and stared at the horizon. "Looks like we're about to build history," he said. And history, as it turned out, would demand more than steel. It would demand everything they had. The orders arrived wrapped in plain brown paper, marked confidential. Inside was a set of blueprints unlike anything Turner had ever seen. Foldable bridge segments, modular hinges, hydraulic joints, all designed to collapse neatly into the back of a truck. A bridge that could drive itself to war. Red whistled low as they studied the plans. "You're telling me this thing folds up like a damn deck of cards?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Turner said, tracing the lines with his finger. "If it works, we can cross rivers in minutes instead of days." Private Miller leaned closer, squinting. "Sir, that's genius, but what if it doesn't hold?" Turner smiled faintly. "Then we fix it until it does." In a muddy camp outside Portsmouth, England, the prototype waited, an awkward skeleton of steel and bolts. The men stared at it like mechanics examining a miracle. American engineers had dreamed it, British factories had built it, and now Turner's unit had to prove it worked. They spent weeks testing every inch, folding and unfolding until their hands were raw. Sometimes it jammed, sometimes it bent. Once, the entire left panel collapsed with a crash that made Miller dive for cover. "Guess she ain't ready for the prom yet," Red muttered, spitting into the dirt. Turner laughed, but his eyes stayed sharp. He knew what this invention meant. In this war, speed was survival. Bridges didn't just connect land, they connected victory. The days bled together with metal clanging, orders shouted, and the constant hum of engines. Each improvement came with a small cheer, a bit of hope. Turner began sketching modifications by lantern light, pencil racing across crumpled paper. When his commanding officer, Major Harkins, visited the camp, Turner presented the bridge like a proud craftsman. "It folds in under 10 minutes, he explained. "Carries 40 tons, maybe more. We can move armor wherever we need it." Harkins studied him. "You think this contraption can change the war?" Turner met his gaze. "I don't think. I know." The Major nodded slowly. "Then get ready, Lieutenant. You'll be the first to take it across enemy lines." Turner felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the weight of history pressing against his chest. He looked at the bridge again, ugly, untested, magnificent, and whispered, "Let's build the impossible." The night before the crossing, the English coast trembled under the rumble of engines and waves. Turner stood by the pier, staring at the endless black water stretching toward Normandy. The folding bridge sat lashed down on a flatbed truck, its steel panels gleaming faintly under the moon. It was no longer an experiment. It was now a weapon of momentum. "Can't believe this is it," Red muttered, lighting a cigarette and shielding it from the wind. "We're really going to France." Turner's jaw tightened. "We've trained for this for months. Now it's time to build for real." Private Miller fidgeted nearby, eyes wide. "Sir, what's it like? Over there?" Turner didn't answer right away. He thought of reports, ruined towns, minefields, rivers choked with wreckage. "It's mud, smoke, and hard choices," he said quietly. "But it's also freedom waiting to be rebuilt." By dawn, the engineers boarded landing crafts, their trucks following behind on larger vessels. Rain fell in thin sheets, soaking their uniforms. The sea churned, tossing the boats like toys. Turner gripped the railing, feeling both fear and duty surge in his chest. When they reached Normandy, chaos greeted them. Wrecked vehicles, broken tanks, and the sharp smell of cordite still lingering in the air. The sound of distant gunfire rolled like thunder beyond the hills. Major Harkins pointed ahead. "That river there, Via. Command needs a bridge up before nightfall. You're up, Turner." The engineers moved fast, unloading the folding bridge under the drizzle. The ground trembled from artillery somewhere ahead, but no one stopped. They worked silently, methodically, every motion drilled into muscle memory. Red shouted over the noise, "Left hinge jammed." Turner crawled under the frame, mud soaking his sleeves, and forced the joint loose with a crowbar. "Try again," he yelled. The hinge snapped into place, and the mechanism unfolded like a metal flower. One by one, the sections locked. A Sherman tank rolled forward to test the load. The bridge groaned, flexed, then held steady. Cheers erupted from the crew. Turner exhaled, chest pounding. "We did it," he said, almost to himself. Miller grinned, wiping rain from his face. "Sir, we just built history." Turner looked across the river where the tanks advanced into the fog. "No," he said softly. "We just built the road to it." The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. The Via River swelled, brown and furious, carrying branches and debris from the ruins upstream. Turner stood ankle-deep in the mud, the roar of the water echoing in his ears. Behind him, engines rumbled. Sherman tanks lined up, waiting for the impossible to become real. "All right, men," Turner shouted over the noise. "Let's show them what this thing can do." Red Callahan's sleeves rolled to his elbows, barked orders to the crew. "Keep those hinges greased. Miller, check the locking pins. If one slips, this whole beauty folds itself right into the river." Miller's face was pale but steady. "Yes, Sergeant." They began the operation. With a series of loud clanks, the bridge unfolded from the back of 2 trucks, panels sliding, hinges snapping open, joints locking in sequence. It was a dance of steel and sweat, rehearsed 100 times, but never under real fire. Every sound, every vibration carried the weight of lives depending on it. Artillery boomed in the distance. The ground shook. A chunk of earth slid into the river, and someone cursed under their breath. Turner wiped the mud from his hands and yelled, "Keep it steady. Focus." The bridge extended over the water like a living thing, its sections glinting under the grey sky. The current battered it, but the structure held, each joint bearing the force evenly. Turner checked his stopwatch. 6 minutes, he murmured. 6 minutes flat, Red grinned. "Faster than the manual says, sir." Turner smiled back, though the corners of his mouth trembled. "Manuals don't build bridges, Red. Men do." Major Harkins arrived on foot, mud splattering his uniform. "You ready for the load test?" he asked. Turner nodded. "Ready?" A Sherman tank rumbled forward, its treads grinding into the bridge's edge. The entire structure groaned, a low metallic wail that made everyone hold their breath. The tank crept forward inch by inch, the panels flexed, the hinges strained. Then silence, followed by a deep, steady thrum. The bridge held. Cheers erupted from both sides of the river. Miller whooped, throwing his helmet in the air. Red laughed, slapping Turner on the back. "Told you she'd hold, Lieutenant." Turner stared at the tank crossing the river, rain dripping from his cap. "That's American steel," he whispered. For the first time in weeks, he let himself believe they could win. By the 3rd week in Normandy, the Miracle Bridge had a reputation, but so did the mud. It swallowed boots, jammed gears, and turned every mission into a wrestling match with the earth itself. Turner's men were exhausted, their uniforms permanently stained brown. The rain hadn't let up since they landed, and every road they built was halfway to sinking before it was even finished. Red kicked at a puddle and grumbled, "If hell's got weather, it's this right here." Turner half smiled. "You'd still complain if it was sunny." "I'd complain better, sir," Red said, earning a few tired laughs. But laughter was rare these days. Machines broke faster than they could fix them. Fuel convoys got stuck miles behind. Some nights they had to drag trucks by hand through sludge, thick enough to eat a man whole. Miller slipped while carrying a steel beam, landing hard on his side. "Damn mud!" he yelled, frustration cracking his young voice. Turner helped him up, his hands firm on the boy's shoulders. "Easy, son. The mud's not the enemy, it's the test." He meant it. Every failure, every delay, was proof of what they were up against. Nature itself tearing at their determination. Yet they kept building, kept moving, because every bridge they finished meant more supplies, more reinforcements, more hope pushing eastward. At night, under thin canvas shelters, Turner studied his maps by flashlight. Rivers, valleys, craters, each line another obstacle waiting to break them. His body ached, his hands blistered, but his mind never stopped working. Red wandered over one evening, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. "You ever wonder why we do this, Lieutenant? Not just building bridges, but doing it in the worst damn conditions God ever made." Turner looked into the steam rising from his cup. "Because someone has to," he said quietly. And because if we stop, everything behind us stops too. Red nodded slowly. Guess that makes sense. Still, I wouldn't mind dry socks once in a while. They both laughed. The sound small but real, one piece of warmth in a world of cold and mud. Outside, the wind howled across the open fields, rattling metal and canvas alike. Turner listened, knowing tomorrow would bring more rain, more mud, more battles. But as long as his bridges stood, the army would keep moving. For the first time in weeks, the front was quiet. The engineers had pushed through mud, floods, and exhaustion. And now, for one rare evening, there were no engines roaring, no explosions in the distance, just the soft hiss of rain against canvas. Turner sat beneath a dim lantern, holding a stack of envelopes wrapped in twine. "Mail call," Red shouted, tossing letters to the men like a dealer at a poker table. The camp came alive with laughter and murmurs. For soldiers who'd been living off adrenaline and rations, a letter from home was more precious than gold. Turner found his name scrawled across one envelope in neat handwriting, his sister, Margaret. He unfolded the paper carefully, the edges smudged with dirt. "Jack, things are tough here, but nothing compared to what you're doing. Rationing's getting stricter. Mom says we can't find coffee anywhere. Everyone in town talks about the boys overseas. They say you engineers are building miracles. I hope you're proud. We are." He smiled faintly, picturing the streets of Ohio, the church bells, the quiet hum of summer nights, the bridge he helped his father build over the Cuyahoga River. The memory felt like another lifetime. Red plopped down beside him, letter in hand. "Got one from my girl back in Austin," he said with a grin. "She says she bought a cow. Named it after me." Turner laughed. "That's either love or an insult." "Knowing her, probably both," Red said, chuckling. Across the camp, Miller read his letter aloud, voice trembling. "My mom says the neighbor painted our porch red again. She still thinks I'll be home by Christmas." The laughter faded into a gentle silence. Turner saw it in all their faces, the ache of distance, the pull of home that no victory could erase. He folded his sister's letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket close to his heart. "We'll get there," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll build every bridge it takes to get there." The rain softened to a drizzle. Someone began humming an old tune, Blue Moon, faint but steady. For a moment, the war felt far away, and all that remained were voices, memories, and the fragile hope carried in paper envelopes. Tomorrow, they would move again. But tonight, they remembered what they were fighting for. Dawn broke pale and thin over northern France, mist curling through the trees. The men of Turner's unit were already up, their boots squelching in the wet grass as they prepared another bridge site. The air smelled of diesel, rain, and fatigue. They had been building non-stop for weeks, but something deeper than duty kept them going. Each other. "Red, hand me that wrench," Turner called from under a half-assembled support. Red tossed it over. "You know, sir, I'm starting to think we're not engineers anymore. We're professional miracle workers," Turner chuckled. "Then let's make another one before breakfast." Private Miller approached, face streaked with grime. "Lieutenant, one of the panels jammed. I can fix it." Before Turner could respond, the young man crawled under the steel frame. A sudden cracking noise followed. A hinge gave way and part of the structure tilted dangerously. "Miller!" Red shouted, diving forward. He grabbed the boy's jacket and yanked him clear, just as the section collapsed with a thunderous clang. Dust and sparks filled the air. For a moment, everything went silent except for their heavy breathing. Then Miller, wide-eyed, muttered, I had it under control." Red glared. "You had a death wish is what you had." Turner's voice was calm, but firm. "You saved his life, Sergeant. And you," he said, looking at Miller, "owe him a beer when this is over." The men laughed, the tension breaking like sunlight through clouds. Later that evening, they sat around a small fire, sharing what little rations they had. Someone passed around a dented harmonica, and Red played a slow tune that reminded Turner of home, of front porches and quiet evenings before the world had gone mad. "We ain't just engineers," Red said after a while, poking the fire with a stick. "We're the arteries of the army. Without us, nothing moves. Not the tanks, not the food, not the hope. Turner nodded slowly. You're right. We build more than bridges. We build the way forward. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the distant rumble of artillery rolled over the hills. In that silence, Turner realized something. They weren't just surviving, they were becoming something greater, bound by mud, sweat, and purpose. Brothers forged in steel. Winter came hard and fast like a clenched fist. Snow covered the forests of Belgium, and the engineers found themselves far from the comfort of any base. Turner's unit had been pushing east with the armored divisions when the world suddenly erupted. German forces had launched a massive counterattack through the Ardennes. Jesus, Red muttered, squinting through the blizzard. They said the Krauts were retreating. Looks like they forgot. Shells thundered in the distance. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Roads they'd built just days earlier were now craters of ice and smoke. Turner felt the weight of command pressing on his chest. They weren't just bridge builders anymore. They were the thin line keeping the front alive. "Miller," he called, "get that truck turned around. We've got to move the equipment before the whole line collapses." Miller hesitated. "Sir, what about the river crossing? The armor's trapped on the other side." "I know," Turner snapped, then softened his tone. "We'll get them through." "We always do." The men worked in bitter cold, their fingers numb, their breath fogging the air. Snow fell thick, burying tracks almost as soon as they were made. Somewhere beyond the trees, machine guns rattled. They reached the river, what had once been a shallow stream now frozen and broken, the bridge they'd built days earlier blown apart by artillery. Red stared at the wreckage. Well, that's one way to ruin a good week. Turner's pulse pounded in his ears. He felt anger rise, but he swallowed it. We rebuild. Tonight. Tonight? Red's eyebrows shot up. Under fire? Turner met his gaze. If we don't, those tanks don't move. If they don't move, the line breaks, and if the line breaks, none of us make it home. Silence fell, except for the wind. Then Red nodded. Guess we better start digging, then. The men began scavenging materials, steel, planks, anything they could find. They worked by feel, by instinct, by the stubborn refusal to quit. Snow clung to their faces, turning them into ghosts illuminated by the flicker of lanterns. As Turner drove a spike into frozen ground, he looked toward the dark horizon. He couldn't see the enemy, but he could feel them out there, close, waiting. "Come on, boys," he murmured. "Let's build faster than they can destroy." The night was black and merciless. Snow drifted sideways under a cutting wind, swallowing sound and light alike. Turner's men huddled near the shattered riverbank, their lanterns dimmed to avoid detection. The enemy was close, too close, and yet the order stood firm. Rebuild the bridge before dawn. Turner's breath came out in sharp bursts. "We work silent," he whispered. "No shouting, no lights. You hear me?" A dozen nods. The men scattered into the dark, moving like shadows. Steel met steel with muffled clangs, wrapped in canvas to hide the noise. Every sound carried risk. Every spark could mean death. Miller crept beside Turner, his face pale in the moonlight. "Sir, what if they spot us?" "Then we build faster," Turner replied, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. "Speed's our camouflage tonight." They laid the first beams across the river, the ice cracking beneath their boots. Turner could feel the water surging below, freezing and alive. His fingers were numb, but his mind ran sharp, calculating weight, angle, pressure, every detail that kept the bridge from collapsing. A flare burst in the distance, lighting the forest for a heartbeat. Everyone froze. The sky turned red, the snow gleaming like fire. Machine guns barked somewhere upstream. Turner's pulse pounded in his ears. "Keep working," he whispered. "Don't stop." Red grunted, tightening a bolt. "This ain't building, Lieutenant. This is praying with tools." Turner managed a tight smile. "Then pray louder." They worked without rest, the structure taking form inch by inch. The men spoke only through gestures, a nod, a hand signal, the faint thud of boots on planks. The night felt endless. Hours passed. Frost clung to their eyelashes and their breath hung heavy in the air. Turner's vision blurred from exhaustion, but he refused to slow down. This bridge wasn't just for tanks. It was for every man fighting to stay alive on the other side. Finally, the last section locked into place. Red checked the bolts, his gloved hands shaking. "She's solid, sir." Turner looked across the river where faint engine lights flickered through the fog. "Then let's bring them home." The first truck rolled across, its weight pressing into the new steel. The bridge held, steady and defiant against the dark. Turner exhaled, the tension breaking like ice beneath his breath. "We did it," he murmured. In the dark, we built the light. Morning came grey and brittle. Frost still clung to the bridge Turner's men had finished hours earlier. The sky was silent, heavy with the kind of stillness that comes after too much chaos. Turner rubbed his aching hands, the skin cracked from cold and work. Behind him, engines rumbled. The tanks were coming. Major Harkins approached, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "You sure that bridge can take the weight, Lieutenant?" Turner glanced at the river, where the steel arcs shimmered faintly beneath the frost. "She'll hold," he said quietly. "She has to." Red snorted, tightening the strap on his helmet. 40 tons of American muscle rolling over a 6-hour job? "What could go wrong?" "Plenty," Turner said, managing a tired grin. "So let's not talk about it." The first Sherman tank crawled toward the crossing, its treads grinding through snow and mud. The men held their breath as it touched the bridge, metal groaning under the load. The entire structure quivered, an iron heartbeat echoing through the valley. "Easy," Turner murmured. "Keep it steady." The tank's driver revved once, easing forward. The bridge flexed but didn't falter. Every bolt, every beam, every calculation was being tested in real time. Red's eyes stayed locked on the midpoint. "If that joint gives, it'll take the whole thing." "It won't," Turner said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring Red or himself. Halfway across, the tank paused. The bridge sagged a fraction, metal creaking like a groan of protest. Then, with a long grinding push, it rolled to the far side and reached solid ground. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the second tank moved forward, then a third. The bridge held, each one crossing smoother than the last. Miller exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Sir, she's perfect." Turner nodded slowly. "Perfect doesn't exist out here, Miller, but this comes close." Harkins clapped him on the shoulder. "You just gave the Army its backbone again." As the last tank disappeared beyond the tree line, Turner leaned on a support beam, exhaustion washing over him. The sound of engines faded, replaced by the quiet rush of the river below. He whispered to no one in particular. 40 tons of steel and 1,000 tons of faith. The bridge had held, and so had they. The sun had barely risen, casting pale light over the mud-slicked field. Turner surveyed the new bridge, already scarred from heavy use, its steel panels dented and scratched. The folding bridge had proven itself time and again, but the cost was becoming painfully clear. A sudden shout made him spin. Miller lay on the ground, blood streaking his arm where a bolt had snapped loose during installation. Red knelt beside him, eyes wide. "Hold still, kid! We'll get you patched up." Turner knelt too, hands trembling slightly as he applied pressure. "How bad is it?" Red's voice was tight. "Bad enough to remind us this isn't a classroom." "Every innovation comes with a price," Miller groaned, grimacing through the pain. I just wanted to help." Turner's jaw clenched. "I know, and that's why you're here. But we can't forget that every bridge we build, every new idea we test, carries risk. That's the way it is in war." The men worked silently around them, a rhythm of hands and tools, but Turner's mind couldn't stop racing. Each improvement, each folding mechanism, each bolt had been designed to save lives. Yet in a cruel twist, one flaw had nearly cost a life. Red wiped sweat and snow from his brow. "We learn, we adapt, and we survive. That's the rule of the game, Lieutenant. No glory without risk." Turner nodded, taking a deep breath. "I understand. But we have to do better. For him, for everyone relying on these bridges." Later, when the medics had taken Miller back to the field hospital, Turner walked alone along the riverbank. The bridge stretched across the water, gleaming faintly in the morning light. He ran his hand over a panel, thinking of the calculations, the prototypes, the sleepless nights. Every triumph had its shadow, every success, its price. And yet Turner knew they couldn't stop. The war demanded progress, demanded courage, demanded faith that innovation could outpace destruction. Red appeared beside him, hands in pockets, eyes on the frozen river. "You worried too much, sir?" Turner shook his head. "Not worried. Determined. Every bridge we build is more than steel, it's a promise. And we keep our promises no matter the cost." The wind bit at his cheeks, sharp and relentless, but Turner felt something steadier than fear, resolve. Innovation had its price, but it was one they were willing to pay. By March of 1945, the snow had started to melt, giving way to thick rivers of slush and mud. But the thaw didn't slow the advance. The Allies were pushing hard into Germany now, and the engineers were right behind the front lines, sometimes ahead of them. Turner's unit rolled east, following General Patton's armored columns. Orders came fast: build, move, rebuild. Every river they crossed was wider, every challenge heavier. The Rhine stood before them like a dare, deep, fast, and heavily defended. Blown bridges choked its banks. Across the water, plumes of smoke curled from retreating German outposts. "We're not just crossing a river," Red muttered, staring at the map. "We're crossing into their backyard." Turner nodded. "And they'll do everything to keep us out." The plan was clear. Deploy the folding bridge under cover of night, support the armor by dawn. The stakes had never been higher. Turner ran his fingers along the blueprints again and again, as if he could will the steel into perfection. Construction began just after sundown. Spotters warned of sniper fire and artillery, but the engineers moved fast, heads low, hearts pounding. It wasn't just skill that got them through, it was something deeper. Weeks of building in mud, nights spent sleepless under canvas, the memory of friends lost and letters read in silence. They finished before sunrise. The bridge unfolded like a blade over the river, each section locking with precision. At first light, the tanks rolled forward, one after another, grinding across the steel spine that linked two worlds. Turner watched them go, hands on hips, chest rising with something he hadn't felt in months, pride unclouded by doubt. War correspondents arrived that afternoon. They snapped photos, scribbled notes, called it a logistical miracle. One even asked Turner for a quote. He said, "We don't build bridges for headlines. We build them because someone has to." The images of the bridge ran in American newspapers days later. Soldiers standing beside it, tanks rolling over it, the American flag rippling in the background. Back home, families pointed at the photos and whispered names of sons, brothers, husbands. Turner barely saw the papers. He was already moving again, eyes on the next river, mind on the next problem. The folding bridge had become legend, but to him it was still just a tool, made of steel, built by hands, driven by purpose. The war ended with a strange kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of urgency. One morning, Turner woke to the hum of birds instead of bombs, to the absence of shouted orders and rattling steel. Germany had surrendered. The fighting was over. Turner stood at the edge of a river in Bavaria, staring at the final bridge his team had built, a clean, strong line of steel stretching over calm water. No tanks rolled across it now, just the occasional jeep, and once a little girl chasing a paper ball. Red appeared beside him, hands in his coat pockets. "Feels wrong, doesn't it? Peace. Like we forgot how to wear it." Turner nodded slowly. "We spent so long building bridges forward. I'm not sure we know how to turn around." Red shrugged. "Maybe we don't have to. Maybe we just keep building different things." Back home, Turner returned to Ohio. The town looked the same, but it felt smaller somehow. The bridge he and his father had once built over the Cuyahoga still stood, rusted at the edges but solid. He walked across it one evening, hands grazing the rail. Cars rumbled by, unaware of the memories welded into every bolt. A boy on a bicycle skidded to a stop beside him. "Hey, mister," he asked, "did you help build this?" Turner looked down, smiling. "A long time ago, yeah." The boy squinted at him. "Cool. My dad says bridges keep things together, like families." Turner's throat tightened. "Your dad's a smart man." The boy rode off and Turner kept walking. He never spoke much about the war, but sometimes at the diner, someone would mention the newspaper photo from '45, the one where tanks crossed a strange-looking bridge in Germany, and a young officer stood in the corner, eyes squinting against the smoke. They'd say, "Was that you, Jack?" He'd smile. Maybe. And if stories like this remind you of what American hands can build, of courage, grit, and quiet brilliance, consider subscribing, because there are so many more bridges worth remembering. Turner never chased medals, but he left behind something greater, steel that held when the world was breaking, built by men who refused to stop. And sometimes when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear it hum. This is the way home. Years passed. The war faded into stories, medals into drawers, and uniforms into closets. But for the men who built bridges beneath fire, some memories never rusted. On a spring afternoon, Turner returned to a small veterans' reunion near Washington. A few dozen old soldiers stood by folding chairs and flags, trading jokes through cracked voices and weathered hands. Most were grey now. Some, like Red, walked with a limp. "Still building anything, Jack?" Red asked, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Turner smiled. "Just a porch last month. Took me twice as long as it should have." Red chuckled. At least it didn't fold into a truck. They stood together near a bronze plaque at the base of a quiet memorial. It read, "To the engineers who carried the war on steel shoulders." Names were etched below. Some Turner recognized, others he would never forget. Miller's name wasn't there. He'd survived, gone home to teach math in Indiana. But Turner remembered the day the boy nearly lost his arm, the way he'd gritted his teeth and still asked if the bridge was finished. The speeches were short. One general thanked them for their service, another read a quote about sacrifice. But what mattered came after. When the crowd thinned and the veterans lingered in the silence, only they understood. Turner walked along a gravel path away from the memorial, past families he'd never meet, children climbing the low stone walls. He sat on a bench beneath a tree and let the wind move around him. He thought about the bridges, their folding arms, their trembling under tanks, their strength when nothing else stood. He thought about the nights spent in cold mud, the laughter shared between bolts and steel, the moments when hope looked like a beam locking into place. They hadn't built for glory. They had built because it was needed. And in that need, they found something lasting. Not just steel, but spirit. Not just design, but devotion. And though time would pass, though names would fade, the legacy remained. Because every tank that crossed, every soldier who lived to fight another day, had walked across something men like Jack Turner gave their lives to build. So when you hear about heroes, don't forget the ones who carried wrenches instead of rifles. And if you want to hear more stories like this, click on the next video, because history doesn't just speak, it builds.